A confidential and unpublished report into the deaths at the hospital where Lucy Letby worked found that the allegations against her were quite subjective and lacked evidence beyond a simple correlation. There were two versions of this report, the second of which being confidential and remained unpublished, but both of the reports stated that there was no obvious factor that linked all these deaths together. The reviewers did point at problems on the unit such as staffing and operational practice. Now, of course, it remains the case that Lucy Letby is convicted of these offences and she is serving 15 whole life terms. And I understand that some people are upset that there's any talk at all that there may be anything wrong with any of the evidence in the two trials that she faced. But let's remind ourselves that Andy Malkinson spent 17 years in prison for a crime that he didn't commit when his conviction was eventually overturned. And just recently we've had Oliver Campbell, who's had his murder conviction overturned, having spent 19 years, I think it was, in prison, and that was 33 years ago he was convicted in 1991. That's how long it can take when evidence can come to court, and in his case, a panel of judges ruled that the conviction was unsafe. So juries can and do get it wrong. That's not to say that that's happened in this Lucy Letby trial, but there are people, a lot of people, professional people, looking at various bits of the evidence to suggest that there may be something wrong. And a lot of prominent lawyers, criminal lawyers, specialists have raised concerns that there is a lot to be concerned about over these trials. A lot of people have also talked about the expert evidence, the expert medical evidence in that trial. I did a video about that yesterday. I will link that below. Please do go and watch that. That is a very interesting video where I break down, I give you two different ways of looking at this. One that will probably convince you that his evidence is absolutely right, and another view that might convince you otherwise. But obviously, that is just the briefest of snippets when the jury went through 10 months of evidence at this trial. And there are, of course, lots of contradictory statements and comments from various people, such as reading a news report on the inquiry here that's going on this week. It says the reviewers said that the consultants based their allegations on Letby being on shift on each occasion an infant died. Combined with a gut feeling, although counsel for the inquiry said there was no evidence that the doctors actually used the phrase. Notes from the review period show that junior doctors had begun referring to Letby as Nurse Death, which caused ripples throughout the team. The neonatal unit ward manager, however, described the allegations against Letby as unfounded and malicious, describing Letby as being clever, exceptional, and very professional, and said that the doctors had tunnel vision about Letby's presence on the ward. The inquiry was also told, however, that the hospital failed to act on suspicions that Letby was deliberately harming babies in her care. That an increase in baby deaths at the hospital was not mentioned in the safeguarding strategy until November 2017, some years after these events, and 6 months after the police investigation had begun. The Cheshire coroner had also said that he did not have the slightest inkling or suspicion that anyone had deliberately harmed babies at the Countess of Chester. In a statement, he told the inquiry that he was not informed that anyone was being blamed for the deaths and that he was surprised that he'd not been told about the concerns of these consultants. Rachel Langdale KC has told the inquiry made a very sensible suggestion that they should consider if CCTV should be placed on all neonatal units to protect babies against malicious and deliberate harm. Speaking aside personally here, I would have thought that that would be something very sensible to do, and I might have thought that that was already there, but perhaps I'm wrong. The inquiry also heard how the medical director Ian Harvey of the hospital retired and moved to France following Lucy Letby's arrest, and that consultants referred him to the General Medical Council in 2018, claiming that he'd failed to act appropriately or timely in response to concerns raised by these clinicians, and an initial investigation found that his conduct may have fallen below the standard expected of a responsible and competent medical director. The GMC, however, closed the referral with no action, and Mr. Harvey voluntarily removed himself from the medical register. Now, as I mentioned in my video yesterday, there is always two ways of looking at these things, so please do go and watch that video from yesterday. It is just the smallest glimpse of how you might be convinced one way or the other. For example, this inquiry for Lucy Letby has been told by very senior counsel Peter Skelton KC, telling the inquiry that the circumstances of the murders, that the critics of the case against Lucy Letby just don't understand that her conviction was not through statistical argument. He said that the fact that the Court of Appeal refused her permission to appeal on this case and she was convicted was because of the factual and expert medical evidence demonstrating beyond a reasonable doubt that she'd harmed the children at the hospital. Mr. Baker KC, representing the families, went on to say that anybody doubting the case should be ashamed of themselves. He said that the families are in no doubt that Letby is guilty. The jury were in no doubt that she's guilty. This is being arrogantly ignored. As a society, he says, we are too quick to make judgment on first impressions. However, and with great respect to the comments of counsel very much my senior, this is the judgment from the Court of Appeal Criminal Division of yesterday for Oliver Campbell, who was convicted in 1991. This judgment allowed the appeal and quashed the convictions, and in addition declined to order a retrial. The fact of this case was that he was convicted in 1991 of the offences of conspiracy to rob and murder. In 1994, his appeal against those convictions was dismissed by the same court. Just as in the Lucy Letby case, she has been convicted, she is serving those sentences, and her permission to appeal has been refused. Now, not that I'm drawing parallels between these two cases, of course I'm not. This is just an illustration of where the justice system can get it wrong. The jury convicted him, the Court of Appeal refused the appeal, and even, as you can read from here, there was an initial application made to the CCRC, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, in 1999, where his representatives relied, amongst other material, on a further report from a professor and on further evidence and from a reporter. But crucially, no referral was made at that stage. A further application was made to the CCRC in 2020, where the CCRC had obtained further evidence from the professor and from a psychologist, and after consideration of a thorough report, the CCRC then decided to refer this case back to the Court of Appeal, which has now quashed the conviction. And so this just serves to provide a little context as to what Lucy Letby's lawyers are trying to do at the moment. They are preparing this application to the CCRC. And as I say, in Oliver Campbell's case, this took more than one application to the CCRC before it was referred back to the Court of Appeal, quashing the conviction, some 33 years after he was convicted. Now, of course, none of this in this video is to convince you that there's any doubt as to Lucy Letby's guilt. All it really is to say is that there is a process that these cases follow. And the CCRC is there for that very purpose. And in Oliver Campbell's case, has found that his conviction was unsafe. So I hope you found that somewhat interesting. I will link yesterday's video in the description below. Please go and watch that. And I thank you for watching.